I started to fish as soon as I could.
When we found out how to bend a pin to make a hook, the 4-foot garden came with a line round the top and the hook.
I went down to the river with a lad named Harris who lived at the 40 steps. He was fishing and I was watching him. He said to me, "Here, hold my rod while I'm away." So I got hold of the rod and away he went. But it wasn't long before there was something tugging on the other end. He did come back in time and it was an eel on there. Well, I might have been as young as 5 years of age.
If we fished for eels and things like that in those days, we had a hand line. It was a line wound around a stick. So you bring all the line off, you got your lead weight on there and the hook, then sort of sling it out, you know, and catch eels like that. That was before you could get hold of a rod anywhere. At the time I would have been, I suppose, about 8. And I was fishing with a lad called David Manson, who had less idea than me. There was a railway line between Bromyard and Leominster. And just above Instone, there was a bridge over the brook. There was a pool under the bridge. And we were fishing away in there, catching minnows. All of a sudden, the float tipped down. And I lifted, thinking it was a minnow, and this poor luckless trout shot out of the water, hit the underside of the bridge, and fell back into the water. I went straight into the brook, up to my chest, grabbed this fish, ran like hell for Bromyard to show my father and mother. He was a manager of a grocer's shop, and I arrived in the shop, soaking wet with this fish. He put a piece of greaseproof paper on the bacon scales and weighed it, and it was 6 ounces. Trout fly fishing, that's always been my favourite.
I was taught to fish by my uncle Jim Walker, who was one of the doctors in Prestine, and he taught me to fish on the Arrow. An astonishingly competent fisherman. I remember standing at Hargest Mill, which is in the middle of our bit of water, in a really rather shallow pool, and I think watching him catch 7 or 8 trout without moving from where he stood.
I remember as a kid camping on the side of the river and catching these grayling and the trout and occasionally a salmon, but we'd cook them up on the side and sort of almost be self-sufficient.
Grayling are beginning to make a comeback on the River Lug, and because certainly 50 years ago the grayling on the River Lug was probably the finest fishing in the country.
That's a chop, that's about £1.5.
You'd catch roach.
The roach practically became non-existent through the 70s and have luckily now built back up again.
I can remember fishing on the shallow water and the shad are spawning.
Came up from the sea.
Spawn by digging a little divot in the gravel, and it looks as if horses have been walking about all over it. But the shad are quite a rare fish these days, and they were quite common years ago.
We used to catch those and they weren't good to eat at all, too bony, but they used to have the eggs out of them, you know.
The introduction of barbel into the river, mostly we think through pike anglers bringing them from other places as live baits to use for catching pike, and then have tipped the buckets of fish back in after their fishing session, and we think that's mostly how the barbel have been introduced.
I started off on the Froome.
The little river Frome is the Lug's last tribute.
And in the very fast water, where the gravel was fine, you'd find a shoal of small brook lamprey. Beautiful little things. Well, the water has to be very clear to do that, very pure.
A young lad shouted he got a flat fish on. There are lots of flounder caught in the brackish water on the Severn, but not so much here. And I thought, I was pulling my leg, he's been to the fishmongers, you know. But I went across and it's a flounder, as big as a dinner plate like this. Beautiful thing. I released it and it shot off, you know, but I mean, we're 40 miles away from the sea here.
We fish with the fly, and we fish with natural flies, with stone flies, with hawthorn flies.
And the great joy is to see when the mayfly are there and the fish are feeding.
I was brought up wartime. There was a lot of illicit killing of cattle and things. And somebody had thrown a large bone into the brook. It was absolutely covered in these candia scrubs, because we used to collect them by lifting the stones up, but they'd been attracted to it. I never forget that, because it used to take me hours to collect a tinful. And I could get a tinful while just lifting a bone out. Yeah.
Seven fine salmon, each between 10 and 20 pounds in weight in one morning's fishing.
George Woodward was a gillie. He was one of the best.
February the 9th, 1977, with a gentleman that used to shoot with us, a Mr. Griffiths, who took me for a day's fishing. And I remember in a snowstorm casting a green and yellow 3-inch Devon minnow out across the River Wye, just below the island at Rotherwas. Have this sudden pull on the end, and a few minutes later suddenly realising I was into a 9-pound salmon. And that was my first Wye salmon.
A river greatly loved by fishermen.
Mr. Pashley, Wizard of the Wye, he could more or less catch salmon to order, you know.
In those days there had been 40 to 50 gillies on the Wye. I think I only know of 4 full-time gillies now. And you could dash near rely that they was going to go back home with fish. Over the years they've declined in numbers that much that it has reached the stage now sometimes when you're rather pleased to see a salmon, never mind catch one. The 76 drought, and it wasn't till they started to die and turn belly up that I think lots of people realised the number of fish that was actually running the Wye. Awful lot of people started then.
It's quite airy in there. You're in there at night, sort of for hours sat up and down, or you can hear the owls, and it's always sort of twice as dark in there as everywhere else, you know. We've had some good poaching catches down here over the years.
88, 89. An hour of darkness left. Oh, come on lads, let's pack up. And one of the lads said, give it just till 4 o'clock. I think everybody was glancing at their watch and thinking, it's come on, 4 o'clock, it's time we was in bed. All 3 of us, without a word, stood up and started packing our kit away, when all of a sudden one of the lads, down, down, down. There was an inflatable dinghy with 4 legs going along the bank, and if you can imagine, the inflatable dinghy was there and we was just down on the riverbank down there. If they'd had the inflatable dinghy on this shoulder looking that way, they couldn't have failed but to have seen us. It took them 45 minutes to put 4 nets across the river. In those 45 minutes they had 46 salmon. They actually landed within a few feet of where I was led in the grass watching them. And I couldn't help but keep thinking, good Lord, they're going to hear my heart beating in a minute. Watch them go around the corner with that, all hell breaks loose. I remember running up there and there's a deflated dinghy rotating over and over, rolling across the floor. Christ's sake, would he get the bloody handcuffs on him, quick? I throws myself down on the ground, grabs the one hand, and I'm just about to clip the handcuffs on, and not that, you bloody fool, that's me! And the 2 blokes, I think, got 9 months apiece.
Years ago, I had a dog called Juno, and she's really good and very protective. And we had a poaching incident up in the headwaters of the river. So we hid up and they arrived and they were in the middle of the river with gaffs and spears and lights. There was about 6 of them.
The numbers of salmon that some of these people caught was quite astronomical. I have been involved in cases where 40 to 50 salmon in 3 or 4 nets was the norm.
We decided, well, we were all in radio communication, we just rushed them. They were poaching in about 2 foot of water, so we ran straight into the river. But I ran into a big hole, about 14 foot deep, so I disappeared under the water, and as I went under the water, I shouted to my dog, hold him. Because when I'd eventually come out and got on the bank, the dog had bit 3 bailiffs and about 3 poachers. There was bailiffs hopping about and poachers hopping about, all been bitten by the dog. Well, she done as she was told, but